computer. Okay, and now let's see, I got to share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen now, the Mayan lunar series?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And we're still good? All right. Here we go. All right. So this lecture is on the Mayan lunar series. And I always get asked this question, what is a stela? And the lunar series appears on a stela. Here's a stela. It's basically just a slab of rock that the Mayans have carved something onto. And they put a lot of hieroglyphs on it. And here's an example of that. This I took from an earlier lecture where I'm showing a stela here. And so what I was teaching in that class was how do you read the stela? And you start in the upper left at what they call A1 here, and then you read A1 and B1, and then you go between the first two columns all the way down. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, there are two books that I recommend. One is this one, The Mayan Glyphs by Cohen Van Stone. And it's a good book, but it's a little confusing. And I was kind of didn't understand why it was confusing until somebody who knew a lot more than I did said, well, Michael Coe wrote the kind of general introduction. Mark Van Stone did the drawings. And then another guy named Peter Matthews, who's really good at epigraphy, reading stuff, put in a lot of the technical details. I'm not sure if any of the people talk to each other when they're doing this, so it's a little jumpy. But the book that I use mostly now is this book called by Scott Johnson called Translating Mayan Hieroglyphs. And why I like this book is because he wrote it as a PhD student um, trying to learn stuff, and this was not his thesis, so he kind of hid this book from his professor when he was doing it. But it's taken more from a student trying to learn standpoint. So then we get to the lunar series, and the lunar series are those glyphs that are marked with the red X's there. And to be able to read a stela, you don't really need to know any of this because it's not anything that has to do with the rest of the action on the stela. Um, but I want to be able to read the whole stela. And besides, these glyphs always show up. And so it's like, why don't I just learn what they are? And a fellow came through and he noted the glyphs from A through G, and they show up in reverse order of that. But three glyphs always show up: glyph G, C, and A. And I've got examples of them here. There are 9 different versions of glyph G. This happens to be glyph 7, G7, and it's always got that little cruller on his head. And glyph C always shows up, and it's usually one of these two guys, and you know it because it's got that little hand. And then glyph A is the last one in the group, and this is that kind of U shape is typically is a symbol for 20, but with the big dot in the middle, it means it's the moon. And it's really off to the side, we have a bar, which is 5, and 4 dots. And the 4 dots are 9. So that means 29. So what the Mayans are doing is trying to keep track of how many days of lunation they have uh, in a series. And so this just says they either said it was 29 or 30 days long. So that's the one that's 29. So now I'm going to get into a teaching technique that was called hose the toads, where you give somebody way too much information. And this typically is what happens when you're trying to learn this stuff. But I learned this when I was in tech, and this is what the engineers at Intel would do. They would just overload you with information. So there's my toad. And typically, what happens when you're trying to learn this stuff is they show you all these glyphs, and it just goes on and on and on. And then near the end, they say most are rarely seen. So I'm going to go the other route. And if you've learned those three glyphs, those three gods that I showed you, G, C, and A, they show up and they're usually five or six glyphs in total. So you're 50 or 60% of the way there if you just learn those three. And I think they're always there. So here's a little quiz for you now. Can you find the glyphs G, C, and A? Okay, there's that glyph G I was talking about, and there it is in what we call column B4. And this is glyph G7. It's got the little cruller head on it. Now, glyph C would be the next one to show up, and it's got the little head, and I think it has a bicycle helmet on it. And there it is. It's actually a skull in this case. And then we have glyph A, which is there. So that is saying there were 29 lunations in this period. So the glyphs follow the date that starts at the beginning of this, known as the long count, and there's also a day sign that shows up. And then after that is a month sign. And the lunar series is part of what they call the supplemental series. And typically, it's the whole supplemental series. There may be a little bit more in there. The 7 day or 819 day cycle may be in there. And they'll show you all that. And then they say, but you hardly ever see that. So we'll touch on it, but it's not a big deal. So just to make sure we're all on board, I'm going to take you through. If you're going to look at a stela, the first thing that comes up is the ISIG, the initial series introductory glyph. And there it is. And in the example we have, it's spanning it's only on one column. Most of the time, it's on two columns. And then comes what's known as the long count. And that would be similar to our Julian day, where we'd say July 7th, 2024 or whatever. But they make it more complicated. Um, they have they have 9 something and 12 something and 2 something, and this character here, that's meh, that's 0. And finally, the 3 long columns, it was each 15 plus 1, that's 16. And then following that is the day sign, and I just brought a day sign up here. And day signs are always in what we call cartouches, the little oval, and it's got these little feet. And there's a bar there, so that's a 5, and the day sign happens to be keep, so it's 5 keep. Then, after you see this, you'd see that lunar series, and then you'd see the month sign, which we saw, well, we haven't seen it yet. And then would come the actual sentence. And sentences always start verb, then object, then subject. Sometimes there's no object, so then it's just a subject. And most of these times, they're people, and those people have titles. So there might be one glyph that's the name, and then there might be 1 or 2 that give titles. And then you'll have a distance number, and you'll have another verb, object, subject. And a distance number is just saying from that long count date, we're going to go so many days, so many weeks, months, years, forward or backwards, and something else happened. So let's look for all this stuff. So I'm going to take you through. Here's the ISIG line, and there's 9 Baktuns, and the Baktun's about 400 years. Then we go 12 Khatuns and 2 tunes. Khatuns, what, 40 years? Yeah, and then a tune's a year, I think. And then we have uh, uh, um, months and days, which are there. So you can see the 16. And then here comes the 5 keeb, which we've seen before. And there I just pointed out. So there's 5 keeb in A4. And this long count, if you look at that 9 Bach tunes, 12 cot tunes, 2 tunes, we say 9, 12, 2, 0, 16, and we just put dots in between it. And we refer to that as a long count or just an LC. So just to review, the lunar series is part of a larger thing called the supplemental series, and that has a 7 or 8, 19-day count in it. And remember, the supplemental series then would be bracketed by a day sign and a month sign. And I put in a month sign down here. And remember, the day sign always has the little feet and the cartouche. The month glyph is also known as the hob. And so the one we're looking at here is 14 because we got 4 dots and 2 bars. So the 2 bars is 10, 10 plus 4, 14. And the month is known as Yakin. All right, so most skip the lunar series because you don't really need to know it to know what the stela is saying. So from an earlier lecture, I said, pro tip, you can skip all this, right? And then say what's next, the month. And so there's the month sign that comes from what's called the Hob calendar. So let's go back and look at those 3 gods a little bit, G, C, and A, because they're the ones you see most often. So I put them up here. And that little hand on C means was bound. And what that glyph is trying to tell you is how many days since the moon started from the new moon. So the 29 or 30 will say, this is how many days we think are in this particular month. And then the C will tell you how far they're into that. The first glyph, which is called the Lords of the Night, has nothing to do with nights, but it got the name and it's never changed. And that is based on because the Aztecs had night gods. And they said, oh, that must be the Mayan version, but it's not. So the Lords of the Night just go from G1 through G9, and they just rotate through day by day, showing these glyphs. And each of the 9 glyphs have 2 representations each, except for G9 over here, it's got 3. And any one of them can show up and just the way it is. So memorize those and you're all set on G. But you know positionally it will be the first glyphs. So even if you don't memorize them, you'll know where they are. And here I blew it up a little bit bigger just so you can see them. This glyph at G1, the hand grasping something, I've always thought that was interesting because the hand grasping, and typically it's thought to be a fish, and it means to conjure in a lot of contexts. And one person said they wondered why did it mean conjure until they went fishing with some Mayans and they throw a drug in the water and the fish just kind of float to the top and they just grab the drugged fish out of the water. So that's why you get that glyph. Glyph C, that's was bound, and what they're talking about is the Mayans put their 6 lunations into a grouping. So glyph C tells you which one of the 6 monthly lunations we're into at this time. And glyph A is just telling you the 29 or 30 days in that month. And so you either are going to get the 20 with a 9 or the 20 with the 2 5s. So it's either 29 or 30. So we're going to just go back through glyph G. There it is at B4, glyph C at A6, and glyph A there at A7. So here's the day glyph just before, and here's the month glyph just after, which brackets the supplemental series. Then after the supplemental series, you would have a verb, and then typically either an object or a subject. And following the name, you'll often have a title like Holy Lord or something like that. In the stele I'm using, we have a verb, which is that upturned frog, which means to be born. And then there is no object, so the subject follows right after that. And the face with the little IL indicates it's a woman. So it's a woman. And this sign over here, the two little things above, that means uh, Holy Lord. And below is one of the long count symbols, which is Khatun. So she's known as Lady Khatun Ahau. And the verb is was born. It's known as the upside, turned upside down frog. And the little dots on it is what makes it the to be born. There's another glyph without the dots. And it's actually said in Mayan Siyaka. The lady is the subject, so she's Lady Khatun Ahau. And let's go and look for them. So here's God G at B4, right? God C at A6, God A at A7, was born at A8, Lady Khatun Ahau at A9, and she's the subject, and then A10 is a title that she has. So the three that you really want to learn are G, C, and A. And they show up in the reverse order that you see here. So it actually goes G, F, E, D, C, B, A, if the other ones are there. So let's start with F, glyph F, which is this little guy you see here, which is known as Tihun Now, which means the reader of the book. And it has 5 different forms, but they all mean Tihun Na. And if you take a look, T is this little top thing there, and Na is this little bottom thing. I consider that bottom thing to be kind of a piece of French bread. So they always have T and Na. And then in the middle is Hun, and they all mean book. So this thing is actually a knotted white headband. And if you are going to be take the throne, you will have the white headband wrapped around you, so it might be seen that way. The hamburger next to there is really a book. See the pages in there, and it is bound in a jaguar skin. That's why the dots are in there. So that's Tihun now as well. And then down here we have a god, Kawil. I don't know why he's in there. And I don't think I had anything on the other guy. No. So now we get to, we did got F. So now we're going to do E and D, and they go together. So E will tell you how many days since the new moon arrived, and that will be used for to say 20. And if you have to add on more, you use D. So there'll be something in here like a 23, 20. So there'll be a 2 or a 3 or a 5 or something like that. So those 2 days, those 2 glyphs will be together. And sometimes they're slapped together in one glyph space. So it's a number plus Huliya, which means days ago it arrived. Huli means to arrive. Now, it turns out that there are 3 more glyphs that they discovered after they did the ABC stuff, and they call them ZYX. And they show up, Z and Y show up between F and E, and X shows up between C and B. So here's the whole order at the bottom there. If they're going to be there, that's the order in which they're going to show up. But before I show you these, I need to show you glyph B. And the reason why is glyph B refers to glyph X, and it reads either its princely name or its holy name, its or his. So that this glyph Kaba is the name glyph. And then this glyph, which I call the headphone glyph, means holy, or it can mean God or deity. So here we have his princely name. And over here, we have his holy name. Well, either one of these can be glyph B. And the little character here, which we're calling Prince, can be any kind of young person. I think male, and I believe the thing by his ear is a young corn cob. So he's just a young sprout. Then glyph X has three gods that are three representations that can rotate through. And remember, I said that there are um, six lunations that are grouped together. And so one God X will oversee those six lunations. And it'll either be the young maize god, the jaguar moon god, or the death god, known as typically maize or JGU, god of the underworld, and then the death god. Now, I'm a little confused as to which god is which in this case, but the one to the far right is the death god. So I'm not sure which ones the other ones are. But there was a table that was found drawn on a wall in a place called Chultun. And here there was a paper that was written that said, oh, here we go. And you see the god rotates through the column A represents 6 months of lunation, and then B another one, and it goes on and on. And so they just showed you this, and they said, okay, well, there's the table. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. What does this mean? And then I found out that glyph X really has a whole bunch of different representations, according to a guy named Dave Alred, who found this from Sergey. And I'm looking at that compared to Dave Stewart's drawings of glyph X, and I'm having a hard time correlating the two. But I marched on, and we'll come back to that in a bit. Then here's the 819-day glyph. This is one of those things that rarely shows up, and it's introduced by this fella here, and then you get into a quadrant, east, west, north, south, and a color is associated with each one. So in the case of east, the color red is associated with it. Now that little oblong thing, vertical oblong thing, is really the symbol for red. So I don't know why they have the faces there, but they do. The this kind of flower look design is keen, and they just repeat it twice, and the last part is knee. So this is Elkeen, and look at west, which is Ochkeen, and those four little guys mean to arrive. And so then we have a black color, a white color, and a yellow color, each associated with a direction. And then it ends with two other glyphs. They think this might be the young baby Kawil, the young storm god, and then the actual fully blown storm god. So after glyph A comes that month sign, right? So we've covered G, C, and A, and all the other little ones in between. But now I want to take a look at that Schultune table because I was really confused by this. They said, well, there it is. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And when you study this stuff, they say, well, in every 6 month cycle, they vary the days between 29 and 30. The Mayans don't use any fractions. So they do 29 and 30. So it was 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30. Add that all up, it's 177 days. So how does this equal 177 days? And it turns out that the actual moon cycle, and so if you do 177 and you divide it by 6, you come up with 29 and a half. Great. So the actual moon cycle is 29 and a half and a little bit more. So how did they do that? How does this work out? And I'm just showing you that this goes on and on. So I got out the old Excel spreadsheet and I took a look at this and I made an A, B, and A takes the first two columns and B takes the next. And here's where I think I said, okay, wait a minute. There's a dot, there's a one. So then 1 times 360, which is the value of the third piece of the Mayan calendar. And so then I said, okay, wait a minute. Here's the 17, 17 times 20, which is 3, 4. So you add that all up. Okay, so now wait, let me go back here. And there's the one for C. And here's a 17 on B. So there's an 8 on A. So A and B must have zeros in there, and they didn't write that in. So now, if you take the values, and the values you multiply by are either 120 or 360, and they come up to, in the case of A, 177, and I divided it, the 177 by 59 to say, okay, the three groups of 29 plus 30, three groups of 59 in there. The next one, B, is just double that. So it's 340. So we're up to 6 now. So if you look in the bottom left there, so I just said, okay, so I'm just trying to figure this out. 59 is the 30 plus 20. So this is just doubling that. And then, so it's marching along here. 3 of those, 6 of those, or one series, 2 series. And so then everything's fine until I get up to 170. Here's a 178 at G. When you add up what's in G, you get 178. And if I divide that, I don't get in 18 going to 21, I get this long fraction. I'm like, wait a minute. But if I subtract 1 from the 178 and divide, then I get my 29. So it's marching along 6, 7, 8, 9 for each one of these seasons. Or so there's what I'm trying to illustrate. So now I look, if you sum this all up, here are the 27 columns. The first one you get 5 177 days ending with a 178. And then from there on, it goes 4 at 177 and 1 at 178. So now I'm asking myself that there's a big discussion about this moon sequence, and you're saying, is this observational or is this mechanical? In other words, the mechanical, or sometimes they call it canonical, is saying, is this just a speedometer that they're overturning, just 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of thing? Or are they actually looking up at the moon and figuring out what's going on. Well, when I got into this, I called up Barb McLeod, and Barb has been doing this stuff for a long, long time. In fact, I asked her to read some glyphs for me for a talk I was giving, and she said she was a little busy right now. She had to recertify for her FAA pilot license. She said, once you get over 80, they make you do it every year. And so I called up Barb and I said, Barb, I'm trying to figure this stuff out. And the moon series. Oh, she said, well, you'll have to read uh, Thompson. And Thompson wrote stuff in the 1950s, and he did a lot of calculations on the calendar and the various cycles of the moon. He didn't believe for most of his career that the Mayan hieroglyphs were phonetic. He thought they were all pictures. And so that kind of threw him off. And so people don't, give him as much credit perhaps as he should have. But then Barb said to me, yeah, you should read Thompson. But if you really want to understand the Moon series, you should read Teeple. I'm going, Teeple? Who in the world is Teeple? He's 1929. And the other thing you got to know about is the Dresden Codex. The Dresden Codex is one of these long fanfold things, and it's used for predicting eclipses and lunar cycles. And this is the kind of stuff that Thompson figured out. So it's an observational thing. But here's Teeple, 1929. And what Teeple thought was he looked at a whole bunch of different places, but 5 different sites, and he had about 100 different lunar um, dates to look at. He thought they worked like tumblers, at least at first, and they just overturned on a mechanical or canonical basis. But he said then they wanted to predict eclipses, so they got more observational, like what the Dresden Codex is. People also, for those of you who are interested in the calendar round, came up with this wheel to show you the whole calendar round, which is the interlocking of the month calendar and the day calendar, the Hob and the Solkeen. There, and here I blew it up just in. If you look over in the left side, you can see 1 IMEX, 2 Ish. So there it is, counting through the days and counting all the way until you get to 260, which is the whole calendar round. Not that it has anything to do with what we're really talking about here. But here is on the left side is Teeple's dates of the various sites that he went to. And I blew up just the top of it so you can see it. But he's got the long count dates figured out, and he's got the God E and D, God C, and God A from these various sites. So what he concluded was that all these sites started out with a lunar date. They weren't all the same date, but they just turned over on a mechanical basis. And then he thought they had some kind of conclave because all the dates standardized for a while. And then they diverged, and he thinks as they moved to more observational data, but the sites did it at different times. So some stele had different lunar dates on the same stela. And he said, well, how can that be? And what could be explained by this? He said, the sites moved, perhaps. They started with a mechanical lunar date where they just, and then they said, wait a minute, we're out of whack here. And they changed to observational so they could predict lunar phases. And a lunar phase can be either a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse and that kind of stuff as well. Um, so thus, if he's right, one stele could have a mechanical lunar date on one side, and around the corner it could have an observational date. And at least one stele has that. Then I talked to Barb, and she says, no one believes that anymore. And I'm like, what? Okay, so what do they believe? And this is when it gets very interesting. This is the technical term, but I get a lot of like people saying things that I don't understand. And I have to ask myself at that point, am I asking the right question? You know? And what I learned from computers is when you don't get your question answered, either they don't know, but they won't say, oh, gee, I don't know, or they didn't understand your question, or you didn't understand their answer. And frequently, you'll find people will tell you what they know. It may not have anything to do with your question, but if it's buried in enough gobbledygook, you won't understand that. Or they switch terminology on you. That's a great thing that they do in the computer biz. So the other thing is maybe they answer your question, but they switch terminology so you don't understand. And frequently, when people do this terminology switch, they're not aware that they're doing this. Have you ever talked to someone that's so deep into something that you can't follow what they're saying, but you say, they must know what they're talking about, but I don't get it. So, or they'll overwhelm you with information, the old hose, the toads. Or they mention some little detail that you didn't know about. And I got this frequently in the lunar stuff, just little odd things. So, my question was in the Schultune table, when do they add the extra day? So if typically we're doing 2930, 2930, and we come up with 177, do they put the 30 in maybe on that second 29 day and come up with some 178, or are they doing something else? And I kept asking, when did they add the day? And I'm looking at the Schultune table. Why did they do what they did? So in the Mayan world, there's an app called Chalk. Chalk is the rain god, and you can put a Mayan date in here, and it will give you the date in Julian terms. And they put in the lunar uh, thing. So I sent a note to Chalk support. I said, when do you put in the extra day? And he said, he didn't answer my question. At least I didn't think he did. He said, well, I base it off of uh, NASA eclipse data. There's a glyph in the Mayan stele that clearly says this on this date there was an eclipse. So we can correlate our calendar with theirs, and then he just counts forwards and backwards from that date, um, from that Mayan date, to come up with his lunar stuff. So therefore, his app calculation is observational, and he's not worried at all about that 2930 stuff because he's just counting forward or backwards from that eclipse. So to me, it appears then that the Schultune table is kind of mechanical, and where you put the extra day doesn't matter if you're being and so it doesn't matter if it's being observational, but is it? So now we get into some really weird math stuff, about eighth grade math, I think. The actual lunar orbit, the time it takes, is 29 and a half point 30589 days. So the Mayans were throwing in an extra day to take care of that little bit of overage. So every so often you need a little day. So now the Schultune table shows 27 cycles of 6 lunar months each, or 162 months. And they have 5 of those are 178 days and 22 are 177. So I multiplied that out. I added it together, so it's 4,784 days. Or if you divide that in, their value is 29.30, right? So the actual is just a little less than what the Mayans calculated over 162 uh, over 162 lunar months, which is that difference, not much, which works out to 23, almost 24 seconds too much per cycle. Not bad. And there's the math for it if you're interested in doing it. So I said the Scholtune table is observational. Now we get into something at this point. If you think you're understanding what's going on, then what you can do in your hose the toads explanation is to throw in the Saros cycle. And you say, well, you really have to know about the Saros cycle. And it's the interplay, and it's used to predict eclipses, both solar and lunar here. And it turns out the cycle repeats every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. So it's a combination of these three different cycles, the synodic, the animalistic, and the draconic. And I'm giving you the time of each one. But here's what it really comes down to. The Earth goes around the sun, and if you were to draw a line between the Earth and the sun and make that a big flat plane, that's known as the ecliptic plane. So the moon goes around the Earth, but at an angle to that ecliptic plane. So eclipses can only happen when the moon is crossing the ecliptic plane. And so they have to be in alignment. So if the moon's between the Earth and the sun, it's a solar eclipse. If the moon's behind the Earth, it's a lunar eclipse. And all that Saros cycle is doing is telling you when that is. However, it repeats 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. So what that means, if you mash it all together, all those cycles together, you get this Saros cycle. And because of those extra 8 hours, it means the place of the eclipse is going to happen at a different spot on the Earth, 120 degrees westward, because 8 hours is a third of the day, and a third of 360 degrees is 120 degrees. So now we get to the quiz. How long is a day? And everyone's going to say 24 hours. That's not right. How long does it take the Earth to go around the sun? You probably say 365 days, because that's how many days are in a year. That's close to 360. And they're 360 degrees in a compass. So they're about the same. So when the Earth is going around the sun, how many degrees does it move a day? About 1 degree. How much time is that? Well, multiply 24 by 60 and divide it by 360, or you can take the 60s out, right? Because it's 6 times 60. So you can divide 6 into 24. It's 4. So it's 4 minutes a day that the Earth is assisted in its day by going around the sun. So an Earth is really the Earth rotation is 24 hours less 4 minutes because it moved around the sun. Are we done? The end. All right. Let's see. Is anybody still awake? Hello? Let me stop the recording here. Where is it? Okay. Oh, stop the share. There we go. Now, can I stop the recording? No, that's not it. No. Oh, here it is.